welcome back to another episode of the Azure Enablement Show. This time we're picking up where we left off. We were talking last time about what do you do when you don't know who has access to production environments using administrative controls, and that's not a good thing. So what do you actually do? That's what we're going to pick up on here on the Azure Enablement Show. Hey, good news. We're back here on the Azure Enablement Show with our Cloud Clinic. Just to set this up again, last time we were talking to Magnus. Hey, Magnus, good to see you. Magnus, we were talking last time because we had a question from Pablo from Hamburg, who was having an issue because they had their security folks being really unhappy with them because it seemed like too many people had access. They didn't know who had access, and this was considered really untenable. And we talked last time about just how problematic that is. But the thing that we didn't do, and that we promised to do in this episode, was talk about what do you do about it from a technical perspective. So with that set up, what do you do about this situation where you either don't know who has privileged access, or there are too many people that have privileged access? How do you handle a situation like this?
Oh yeah. That is like concretely, you need to do something. You need to fix this problem. It leads to all the things we talked about last time, right? All the different kinds of problems. So concretely, what are you going to do to make it better? Access in Azure is controlled by role-based access control. So that's kind of one part of it, but there are things within role-based access control that you could do better or worse. And then there is this additional feature or service in Azure called privileged identity management, which is also a very nice additional thing to have. You don't have to have it, but it's really good when you do. So let's break this down and start with role-based access control. So the paradigm is such that you grant access to people from your Active Directory in Azure. They get access to various things, your database, your website, and they can modify them or just read them or whatever they can do. What I find problematic here is that if you look into Azure and you look under access control and you see various people's names, humans in there, that could be an indication that things are a little bit messy in here. You should be working with security groups. And this is something we have done in IT since eons, since always. People who should have access to this database are in the following group. You should really apply that same logic to Azure. I don't know why a lot of my customers just don't do that. They give access to John and Jill and whoever, Rachel, all the people. And that leads to problems when they, for example, quit, and it's hard to manage and govern and take care of. So you should definitely, when you set up what's called landing zones or subscriptions in Azure where your applications will go for the workloads you're going to run, you should also consider setting up some access groups. Like, here's the database team, they have their own access group, and here's the web team, they have their access group, and so on, right?
And then you would go forth and instead of listing the person, you'd list the group. And I guess the plus of this is that in order to pull somebody's access from all the things that they're in, you can just put them in or out of groups. Yes. And then you don't have to always be fiddling and wondering, like, what, I have 30 people listed here. Are they here? Are they there? If you would just pull them out of the group, then anything that group is in, they're automatically out. So that makes a lot of sense. What was the other thing you were talking about besides role-based access control?
Well, that was privileged identity management.
Okay. So
privileged identity management, or PIM for short, is a feature of the Active Directory. So it's a premium feature, so you'll need to have what's called a P2 license to be able to use that feature. But it is very nice to do, and it gives you the opportunity to do something really special with access control. You don't have to anymore give permanent access for your team members. Instead, you can give eligibility to have access. So you configure the access, but they don't have it yet, but they can activate it when they need it. A great example of that is production areas. For example, if you have an application running in Azure in production, you might not want your team members to always have access to that, to be able to modify that environment. It could be a problem, if they their account gets stolen or something like that, that someone else may go in and change things in production. But they'll be able to elevate to get the access when they need to have it. Now, there are various ways of doing that. One way is to just let them in. Once they ask for access, they have it. And then you might wonder, what's the point? And the point is this: mobile phones, multi-factor authentication. You actually have to have your mobile phone to get the access, which is a good security measure to have. But there's also the option to say, well, before you get access to elevate your access to enter the production environment, you have to ask for permission from the manager who signs off. This gives everyone who works in the organization such a relief, really. They no longer have to be responsible for having permanent access to dangerous areas where a change could actually mess something up in production for your customers. Instead, you kind of know when to be extra careful. That's when you go into, for a specific purpose, into production to elevate access at that time. Now, PIM is, just to sum up for PIM is a little bit tricky to set up. It's a little uncomfortable in the beginning, but once you get used to it, once you get into it, it's really, really well worth the effort.
That's cool. I would imagine that, I mean, I'm a big fan of removing persistent administrative access as well.
Yeah.
I would imagine the other plus you get is a really good audit log of who had permission and when to be able to touch production, which is, something you don't ordinarily have if you're just walking around with superpowers.
Yeah, that's true. Now, any modification you make in Azure is always registered in the activity log, including specifically in this case, which is a nice thing to have a security trace on. Some organizations even have that as a requirement, that you have to have a trace saved of who had access to what at what point.
Yeah.
And that's where this really comes in handy, because you have to say, now I want to activate my permission to modify the production environment. And then it says in the log, Magnus activated his permission to enter it's really a useful thing to have.
Cool. Well, I think this is a good place to end. Pablo, I just want to thank you for your question about privileged access and how to handle this from a security perspective. Magnus, thank you for answering the question. And thank you all for watching this. And I hope everybody will join us again on the Azure Enablement Show.